A CTO asked me recently, can you help me work with the executive team to get technical debt prioritized on the roadmap? And I said, sure. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stop talking about technical debt. Technical debt is the kind of term that, yes, it makes sense to us as engineers, but it is holding you back in every interaction where it matters. First of all, debt means different things to different people, and different people have different appetites for different kind of debt. So think, for example, you might have a credit card debt. That's something you probably want to pay off really fast. You might have a mortgage. That's a leveraged debt that you're paying the interest back on because you think that your house or your asset will appreciate faster than that interest rate. Maybe you've got a business loan. That's there to fund the growth in your business, right? Not all types of debt are equal. And people have a different debt appetite. It can even be a cultural thing. In some cultures, the very notion of taking on debt is seen as something to avoid completely. In others, it's actually a really great leverage tool that people look as something that they should take on and help grow their wealth. Different people, different appetite, different understanding. Every time you use technical debt, you can't be sure what sort of reaction or what sort of mental model that person is going to apply when you start to talk about technical debt. So you really shouldn't wonder why you might be having trouble getting people to take it seriously. But even aside from the different ways that debt can be interpreted, it's just too vague. Technical debt can mean anything from, I don't like how that was implemented, through to, yeah, this is starting to fall apart and or will break and or is, about to fall over if we get another user on board. When you wrap it all up in that opaque framing of it's just technical debt, you lose the ability to properly articulate to your stakeholders, what is it that this thing is going to do if we don't address it? Is this the kind of thing that we should fix at some point in time? Is this the kind of thing that we need to fix before we can grow to another 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 users? Is it the kind of thing that's actually causing churn? Again, it's such an opaque term that you just can't be sure exactly what the receiver is going to interpret versus what you actually meant for them to take on board. But here's the most important thing to know and the biggest problem with talking about technical debt. At the end of the day, when you pitch to someone that you want more time or you want to prioritize work to pay down what you define as technical debt, that's a net negative outcome for the business, at least in the short term. Right? Even if they say, yeah, sure, go take 4 days, 4 weeks, 4 months, hopefully not 4 years, to go and pay down that technical debt. Well, at the end of it, you're left with a system that operates the same kind of way, right? It does the same thing. Sure, it's picked up more resilience, it's more reliable, it might be faster to work on, faster to iterate with. But from a business outcomes perspective, after you've spent that time paying down this technical debt concept, from the business's perspective, it's the same thing doing the same thing. That's a net negative proposition. And any engaged executive should push back on you and challenge you a lot with such a proposition. So here's how I'd recommend you reframe it. Don't think of it as this notion of technical debt. Reframe this as it's a velocity tax. Why does this work? Well, because tax is pretty much universally understood as something to be minimized as much as possible, unless you're the government. When you talk to an executive in terms of this not being technical debt, but it being a velocity tax, it unlocks a better, deeper, and a more intuitive understanding of the issue. Because the reality is you can't pay a tax in a lump sum, right? It is something that you need to chip away on. It's an ongoing thing, as is the ongoing maintenance and improvement of our technical systems. And it works because it puts it in the right framing where you can say to someone, listen, if we spend, $100,000 of engineering time to deliver that feature, because of the velocity tax, let's say it's 30%, for every dollar we spend delivering that feature, 30 cents of that is wasted. Right? 30 cents goes on fixing that authentication system that's always falling over. 30% goes into having to rewrite all the plans in that billing system because we still haven't modernized it. Frame it as a tax. First of all, that's a number that people can wrap their head around quickly. It's a concept that needs no explanation, and it's fairly universal what the right approach is. Minimize it. It's a number that executives can easily wrap their head around and are immediately attuned to, okay, how do we start minimizing that? And here's my advice of how to minimize it. First of all, it's an incremental and it's an embedded process. Even if we go back to calling it technical debt, I'll tell you what, technical debt and paying down of technical debt does not belong anywhere on any roadmap. Again, because it's net negative, but also from a customer's perspective, you go out there to a customer and say, great news. In this quarter, we paid down a huge amount of technical debt. They'll be like, I don't care. Where's that feature I need? Where's that thing that I've been asking you for so long? Okay. That's what a roadmap for. A roadmap is for discussing with customers what's coming, what to get excited about, and for them to start to plan their adoption strategy around that. Technical debt does not belong on there. In fact, even if you reframe this as a velocity tax, does not belong on a roadmap. What belongs on a roadmap is the business outcomes that you're going to deliver, those incremental steps that unlocks customer satisfaction, more revenue, more customers, that flywheel of growth. That's the thing that goes on a roadmap. So what you need to do is, as a technology leader, you need to take a step back and go, okay, think to yourself, where do we want to get to? You've got to have that desired end state in mind. You've got to know what great looks like. Once you know that, start to work backwards and say, okay, what are all the incremental steps that I need to take to get towards that desired end state? The trick here is to break it down into a lot of quite atomic, very incremental, and relatively small steps. Because here's the magic. Rather than trying to put these things on a roadmap somewhere where they do not belong, you attach these to all of those other items on a roadmap. Now, this is not some tricky exercise of pulling a sleight of hand on your product manager or product owner. This is a different conversation to have. Rather than saying, I need time to pay down technical debt, or we've got a velocity tax that needs to be identified, you approach this by saying, hey, that feature that's coming up next on the roadmap, we're going to do it in a way that makes sure that every time we work on that feature going forward, every time we make some sort of incremental change to it, that we're going to have to spend just the minimum amount of effort required, just that incremental effort to deliver that change. That is, we're going to make sure that we don't build this in a way where we're going to then have to rewrite things later, refactor things later. You put it in the actual delivery of that feature. Again, this comes back to why, what, and how. If someone has a shared vision of why something is important, someone's going to define what is required to deliver that, and then you as the technology leader, as well as being part of those conversations, are the expert that defines how you're going to deliver that. And that how should include how you're going to deliver the feature, the change, whatever it is, in a way that ensures future velocity in that part of the system, but more importantly, makes the systems around that even better. That's an incremental way to reduce the velocity tax. So folks, please stop talking about technical debt. Start quantifying it as a velocity tax. It will make sense to your stakeholders, and it's a much healthier conversation to have, and you can be far more certain about how the receiver of that conversation is going to understand what you mean when you say the velocity tax. Because your executives, they do not need to understand your architecture. That is just a fool's errand, right? Some will get it and some are curious about it. But if you're having to engage with an executive and start to talk them through your architecture, that's risky. You'll probably lose them. But more to the point, it's missing the point. What an executive needs to know is that for every feature you're delivering, it's costing more than it should. That will immediately pique their interest. And they'll naturally be saying, oh, okay, what can we do to help that? How do we make sure that when we spend $1, we get $1 worth of output? That's where you introduce the velocity tax concept and start to get license to start to address the things that you otherwise are really struggling to get people to prioritize. In the end, you'll ship faster, you'll reduce your cost of change, and you'll protect margins at scale. And best of all, that is a growth conversation that is worthy of a senior technology leader.